video of our multi-video seller series, we shall look at post-closing activities. The real estate transaction has now officially closed, so to what things do the title company, seller and buyer still need to attend? Here are 4 categories of items that still need attention post-closing.
Number 1. Disbursement of funds. Probably the most important activity post-closing is one performed by the closing company, and that is the disbursement of funds. Once the real estate transaction has closed, the closing company will carry out the laborious and very exacting process of paying out funds to the parties which have funds due to them per the settlement statement. The seller will usually receive the bulk of the funds, together with the seller's mortgage company, should the seller have had a mortgage on the property. Other parties to receive funds at closing will be the real estate offices for the buyer and seller's agent, if agents were involved in the transaction, the buyer's lender, in the case of a financed buyer, for services rendered, and to open an escrow account for taxes and insurance for the buyer, the closing company for services rendered, the state in the way of deed stamps on the title, and lastly, the homeowners association. The latter may be owed some back HOA dues by the seller and frequently will also collect a transfer fee or a capital contribution fee from the buyer. There may be additional fees due to third parties, such as search companies, a seller's FERPTA accountant, a seller's management company for services rendered, and recording fees for recording documents at the courthouse.
Number 2. Seller post-closing housekeeping tasks. The seller has now handed over the keys to the property, either in person or through the real estate agents or the closing company to the buyer. The seller, however, has not finished his or her to-do list at this point. On a practical side, the seller needs to contact his or her utility companies to terminate service in his or her name. This is not just the electric, water and gas service, but also internet and cable. The seller will also need to terminate lawn and pool care and also pest prevention services if these services were being paid by the seller and not included in the HOA fee. In the case of absentee owner sellers, the seller will also need to settle his account with his property management company. If the seller has been receiving mail at the property, the seller should notify the post office of a forwarding address for any future mail to prevent it being continually delivered to the property.
Number 3. Seller post-closing financial tasks. Assuming the seller has had homeowners insurance on the property, the seller needs to contact and notify the insurance company that he or she no longer is the owner of the property, so the insurance company will stop the coverage and then refund the remainder of the premium commencing from the day of closing. If it so happens that the insurance was recently renewed, this refund could be a fair amount of money. In the case of a seller who has had a mortgage on the property, the seller also would be well advised to contact his or her lender to make sure that the lender is sending the seller the contents of his or her escrow account that was used to pay the seller's taxes and insurance on an annual basis during the seller's ownership.
Number 4. Buyer post-closing tasks. While the seller is discontinuing utility and other home services, the buyer in turn needs to be starting up those same services in the buyer's name to make sure where possible that the home is not left at any time with a loss of any service. In communities where the home does not have its own individual mailbox, the buyer will also need to visit the post office to obtain mailbox keys if these were not passed on by the seller, and even if the home has its own mailbox, to register his or her name as receiving mail at that address from this point forward.
Thanks for watching, and make sure to check out the rest of the videos in our seller series.